Well, blessings, everybody, and I thank you for joining with me again. This is lesson 1 of the 4th course of the Kings and Prophets series. And this first lesson, we've been covering the book of Obadiah, a very short little book of prophecy, but very, very powerful. So be certain that you read these verses today. It would do us no harm if we read the entire book. It's 21 verses long. Okay, and what we see right here is that Edom is going to be destroyed, but Israel is going to be blessed. God would bring Edom down. He would destroy them, and he tells them why. He says, I'm going to do it because of the violence that you have done to your brother. And what we see here is that the one who curses and goes against Abraham's descendants. Now, these are Abraham's descendants through Isaac and Jacob. If you've done a study with us in Genesis, you realize that Abraham has descendants on the other side also. And that's the reason we have so much turmoil in the Middle East today. But those through the line of the promised one, if you curse them, they will be cursed by God. And God hasn't changed that promise. Nations suffer when they go against Israel. We see that happening even today. So what we see happening here in verses 10 through 14 is that there was a time when Israel was invaded by other nations, and Edom actually participated in helping in various ways. We don't know exactly which one is being referenced here. It could be all the times that this occurred, because it happened several times. It could have been when the Philistines and the Arabians came against Jehoram, king of Judah. It also could have been the time of the Babylonian captivity. Whichever or whatever it is, Edom not only gloated and rejoiced over Judah's time of destruction, they entered in and looted Jerusalem. And when people were trying to escape from Judah, from Jerusalem, Edom even cut down the fugitives and imprisoned some of the survivors. And God said, you should not have done this. You're going to be judged. We see here that the day of the Lord, and this is the day of the Lord future, will bring judgment for all the nations, including Edom. They will be judged according to what they have done, especially related to Israel. Now, we didn't study this in our homework, but Matthew 25 really speaks to that. You know, the sheep and goats judgment. Most people misinterpret what's really going on right there, and is speaking of what's going to happen to the nations. We'll talk about that some other time. We see that the house of Jacob and Joseph will consume Edom, and there'll be no survivor of Esau's house. The exiles of Israel will possess all of Edom's stuff. The kingdom will be the Lord's, and Esau will be judged from Mount Zion. You had several cross-references in the homework you checked out, and they all pointed to what God's going to be doing with Edom. In Ezekiel verse 5, we seem to have some understanding right here that the time of Edom's sin against Israel was the Babylonian captivity. Then in Numbers, we see that there's going to be one that comes from Jacob who will have dominion, and Edom will be a possession. Israel will perform gallantly. Then in Isaiah and Amos, we see that when the Lord gathers Israel back to the land, they will also possess Edom. That gathering back to the land has happened in our time, 1948, folks. Then in Malachi, quoted in Romans 9, we see that the Lord chose Jacob and not Esau. Edom thinks that they will return, but God says, no, I'm going to tear you down, because God is against them forever. Then lastly, in Zechariah 14, we see that the kingdom is given to the Lord and to the Lord's people, and those left of the nations after he judges them will come to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast. This is interesting, because we're going to see that in the 1,000-year reign that there will be people from the nations. I know a lot of times, like in my background and stuff, you think, well, it's only certain people that will be during that time. But Matthew 25 also gives some more insight into that. Judgment of the nations and the day of the Lord are yet future, but Edom's final judgment is also yet to come. Now, take all these truths and realize some things, that when the Lord spoke to these prophets, he spoke about things that were about to happen in their life, but there's a lot of things that have yet to come to fruition, particularly when he says, and in that day, the day of the Lord. The truth is this: are you ready for the day of the Lord? Thank you for being with me, and I'll see you again next time.